was a humid summer day in Philadelphia. The room was hot, crowded, and buzzing with history in the making. On July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress voted in favor of independence. 2 days later, on July 4th, the Declaration of Independence, then largely by Thomas Jefferson, was formally adopted. The colonies had spoken. They were no longer British subjects, but free and independent states. What followed would be one of the most improbable and hard-fought wars in world history, the birth of a nation against the greatest empire on earth. The Declaration of Independence, with its stirring preamble and bold assertion of rights. The Declaration of Independence was more than a political document, it was a revolutionary manifesto. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Jefferson's words were rooted in Enlightenment ideals. The document listed 27 grievances against King George III. From unjust laws and military oppression to taxation without consent. It declared that the colonies had the right to separate because Britain had broken its social contract. News of the Declaration spread quickly. It was read aloud in public squares, printed in newspapers, and celebrated with bonfires, bells, and parades. In New York, a statue of King George was pulled down and melted into bullets. But for all the joy and pride, the Declaration marked the beginning of something far more serious: total war. The British strike back, the British response was swift and powerful. In the summer of 1776, the British assembled the largest expeditionary force ever sent across the Atlantic, over 30,000 troops, including Hessian mercenaries. Their goal was to crush the rebellion and restore imperial rule. General William Howe, commanding the British Army, landed in New York Harbor with a fleet of over 400 ships. Facing him was General George Washington with a far smaller and less experienced Continental Army. The Battle of Long Island, the first major battle after the Declaration, came in Brooklyn, New York. Washington's forces attempted to defend the city but were badly outflanked. The Americans suffered a crushing defeat, with more than 1,000 casualties and many captured. But Washington pulled off a daring nighttime evacuation across the East River under the cover of fog, saving his army from destruction. Despite the loss, the Continental Army lived to fight another day. Dark days. The retreat through New Jersey. Following the defeat in New York, the British chased Washington across New Jersey, capturing city after city. Morale plummeted. Many soldiers deserted. Congress fled Philadelphia. It seemed the revolution might be over before it truly began. But Washington refused to give up. He knew he needed a dramatic move to revive the cause, and he delivered it in spectacular fashion. The crossing of the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton on Christmas night. 1776. Washington led 2,400 men across the icy Delaware River in small boats. They marched through the snow toward Trenton, New Jersey, where a Hessian garrison was encamped. In the early hours of December 26, the Continental Army launched a surprise attack. The Hessians were caught off guard and quickly overwhelmed. Nearly 1,000 were captured. It was a stunning victory, small in scale, but massive in symbolism. It revived American confidence and proved the cause was not lost. Washington followed it with another success at the Battle of Princeton just days later. Seeking allies. France enters the war while Washington battled in the field. American diplomats worked abroad to gain support. Benjamin Franklin, sent to France, charmed the French court with his wit, humility, and tales of American resilience. The French, eager to weaken Britain after past defeats, were interested but hesitant. Everything changed after the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. The turning point, Battle of Saratoga. In upstate New York, British General John Burgoyne attempted to march south from Canada, hoping to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. But his army became bogged down in thick forests and guerrilla attacks. At Saratoga, American forces under General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold defeated the British and forced their surrender. Over 6,000 soldiers captured. This victory shocked Europe. It proved the Americans could win on open ground and prompted France to formally join the war in 1778. Spain and the Dutch Republic would later join the conflict, turning the American Revolution into a global war. The winter at Valley Forge. Despite the victory at Saratoga, the Continental Army faced a brutal winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Food was scarce, shelter was inadequate, disease was rampant. Nearly 2,000 soldiers died from exposure, hunger, and illness. But it was also a time of transformation. A Prussian officer named Baron von Steuben arrived to train the troops. He drilled them in discipline, maneuver, and tactics, instilling professionalism and unity. By spring, Washington's ragtag army had become a trained fighting force. The War in the South. By 1778, Britain shifted its focus to the South, where they believed Loyalist support was stronger. They captured Savannah and Charleston, winning key battles and hoping to rally Southern colonists to their side. But the plan backfired. Guerrilla leaders like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, waged hit-and-run attacks. American forces under Nathaniel Greene and Daniel Morgan wore down the British in a war of attrition. At Cowpens and Kings Mountain, the Americans dealt devastating blows. The South, like the North, became a battleground of resistance. The tide turns. Yorktown by 1781. British General Charles Cornwallis had moved his army to Yorktown, Virginia, seeking to regroup and await reinforcements by sea. But Washington saw an opportunity. In a bold move, he marched his army south over 400 miles in secret, joining with French forces under General Rochambeau. Meanwhile, the French Navy, under Admiral de Grasse, blocked the British fleet from reaching Cornwallis. On October 19, 1781, after weeks of siege and bombardment, Cornwallis surrendered his entire army, over 8,000 troops, to the American and French forces. The war wasn't officially over, but the British will to fight had been shattered. What began as scattered resistance had become a full-scale war, and now the colonies had done the unthinkable. They had defeated the greatest empire in the world. But the final chapter still had to be written in paper, not the battlefield. The guns fell silent at Yorktown in October 1781. The earth shook with celebration as American and French troops stood and Agenal Cornwallis had surrendered. After 6 years of war, sacrifice, and struggle, the dream of American independence seemed within reach. But the revolution was not officially over. It would take 2 more years of negotiation, diplomacy, and political tension before the new nation was formally recognized. The Treaty of Paris, in Paris. American negotiators Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay met with British officials to hammer out the terms of peace. After months of negotiation, the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783. The terms were clear and decisive. Britain recognized the independence of the United States of America. The new nation's borders stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, and from Canada to Spanish Florida. American fishermen were granted rights to fish off the coasts of Newfoundland. Both sides agreed to settle debts and return confiscated property to Loyalists. On November 25, 1783, the last British troops evacuated New York City, known as Evacuation Day. The war was truly over. A new nation was born. The fragile new republic victory brought not only freedom, but also enormous challenges. The 13 colonies, now independent states, had to govern themselves. At first, they were loosely held together by the Articles of Confederation, a system that left most power with the states and gave the national government little authority. The young republic struggled with debt from the war, economic instability disputes between states, foreign threats, and internal unrest. Some feared the revolution had won liberty, but left chaos in its place. From revolution to constitution, it became clear that a stronger, more unified government was needed. In 1787, delegates from across the states met in Philadelphia to revise the articles, but they went much further. they created an entirely new document, the United States Constitution. It established a federal government with three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, and included a system of checks and balances. The Constitution was debated fiercely. Some feared it gave too much power to the central government. To address these concerns, a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, was added in 1791, protecting freedoms such as speech, religion, and trial by jury. With the Constitution ratified, the United States took its first steps as a unified, democratic republic. Global impact of the American Revolution. The American Revolution did more than create a new nation, it inspired the world. In France, revolutionaries looked to America as a model for overthrowing monarchy and establishing a republic. Movements for independence spread through Latin America, the Caribbean, and beyond. Even in Britain, political reforms began to take shape in the wake of the American loss. The words of the Declaration of Independence, "All men are created equal," echoed across the globe, challenging monarchs and empires. Yet these words would also cast a long shadow in America itself. The incomplete promise of freedom, while the Revolution declared liberty for all. It left many Americans outside that promise. Women had played critical roles as nurses. Spies, messengers, and even fighters were denied voting rights and legal equality. Enslaved Africans remained in bondage across the South. Though northern states began gradual abolition, slavery persisted for nearly another century. Native American tribes, many of whom had allied with the British, were pushed off their lands and faced relentless expansion from the new republic. The Revolution had opened the door to freedom, but only partially. The struggle for equality and justice would continue for generations. George Washington, the reluctant leader in 1789. George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. He could have ruled like a king, many would have supported it, but he chose a different path. He served 2 terms, then peacefully stepped down, setting a precedent for democratic leadership. In his farewell address, Washington warned against political factions, foreign entanglements, and the dangers of disunity. His example shaped the office of the presidency and defined the tone of American leadership for generations to come. A nation built on revolution, the American Revolution was not perfect. It was messy, contradictory, and left many struggles unresolved. But it was also visionary. It proved that ordinary people, farmers, merchants, craftsmen could challenge kings, empires, and centuries of tradition. It showed that liberty was worth fighting for, and that government could be built by the people, for the people. It laid the foundation for a nation constantly evolving, questioning, and striving to live up to its founding ideals. From colonial hardship to revolution, from rebellion to republic, the story of America's independence is a story of courage, sacrifice, and hope. It began with a simple belief that people should govern themselves. And that idea, once planted, would grow far beyond 13 colonies to become a nation and a beacon to the world.